Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a lovely Sunday. Guten Tag, guten Morgen, Moin, as we say in Bavaria. As you can see, I'm still working on Lenatus. For those who haven't seen this before, I have been working on this project for several weeks. I had high hopes that I would be able to finish it next week. I don't think that is going to happen. The project is called Lenatus by Susan Crawford. You can see the details on the left side of the screen there. It is a Fair Isle yoked 4-ply sweater. So by yoked, it refers to the area around the neck and the shoulders, like a yoke on an oxen. But when you're talking about sweaters, it refers to designed elements around that area. And so here you can see the top of the sweater. And so as you can see, the design just carries around the yoke area. The sleeves, this is knitted top down. So I started at the collar and I've increased as I've moved down. And right now the sleeves are actually sitting on some scrap wool. So I've actually threaded, you can see some white there on the edge. I've threaded some wool just through those live stitches where I will then, after I finish the body, go back and put those stitches on a needle and knit a tube downwards for the arm. So this jumper is in fact a series of tubes. But yeah, this is Lenatus. The pattern comes with a few different options, one of which has this Fair Isle patterning continuing on the entire body of the garment. And I was talking to a friend about it on Facebook last night because it would definitely be more fun right now, considering I'm knitting this part, the long body part, the long, boring, just stocking stitch part. It'd be more fun to be doing the patterns. This way is faster. It's just more boring. And anyway, I'm kind of going through a bit of a phase where I really like just the patterning on the yoke. I've knitted a few that style, and so that's what drew me to the pattern. But yeah, you can knit it with Fair Isle the whole way around. There's also sleeves. So I'm going to be doing plain sleeves, as I mentioned. But you can also, for example, carry the patterning over the entire sleeves, and it comes with both long and short sleeve options. I'm thinking at this point I will do the long sleeves, but I reserve the right to get sick of all this stocking stitch and maybe just do short sleeves and wear it with a t-shirt underneath. We'll see. So yes, so I am doing the endless slog of the body, but something interesting since you saw it last is I have switched to needle size. So this pattern actually has you use a larger needle. Like you start off at the collar with a much smaller needle, and as you move down the body, you actually graduate upwards in thickness of your knitting needles. And that means that the garment gets bigger. It helps make it slightly bigger because the stitches are looser and are further apart. And so that gives it some shaping. Otherwise, I mean, the other way to do shaping is to keep the same needle but add stitches in. For example, at each side, making like a fake side seam line. But this is an interesting technique to just go up a needle size, and it's going to make it a bit looser, and it's a fairly casual fits jumper. It's not meant to fit super tight, especially around the hips. So I'm using a larger needle, which technically should make this part go a little faster because the rows will be just infinitesimally higher. And the stitch is slightly bigger, so theoretically the length should grow a bit faster, hopefully. But I have moved it up to the 3.5 millimeter needle. I was using the 3 millimeter needle last week when you saw me, and I moved up to the 3.5 millimeter. And I thought I would show you because I'm now using interchangeable needles. So I've talked about this a bit in the past on the previous streams. But interchangeable needles, so I'm using a circular needle, which is going around and around in a circle as a spiral. Okay, so there's no seams. I don't have to sew this jumper together. And so the needle is a long cable with two ends on it. And you can use a needle like this to knit normal flat things. You don't have to knit tubes. You can knit and then turn it around and go back the other way, just like you can with normal straight needles, which is why I prefer these to straight needles. They're actually way better. I never buy straight needles anymore. But these ones, these are actually the ones I told you about. These are the Addi Clicks. Addi's a German brand. They're really good. I like how smooth their needles are. It works really great with this particular wool. And because they're a little blunter, I'm not splitting the wool. This wool, you can split a little bit if you're not careful. And so these needles work great. But the secret is in this mechanism. So as you can see, the ends actually pop off. And I can't, there's a little sort of groove on the end there. And these are actually, the tips are actually spring loaded. So to put a new tip on, you kind of push it on, push it in and turn, and it clicks into place. So the set comes with different length of cable and about a dozen or so different sizes of the needle tips. And the brilliant thing about this is, you'll recall when I was doing the 3mm needle, I was using a normal fixed circular. And that meant to try it on to test the size, because the circular length I was using wouldn't go around my torso, I had to thread it all onto some scrap wool before I could try it on. Well, with this needle, I can actually do something more special with that. Because of the click, I actually have a joiner, so I can join two cables together. So I can click the end off, put on the joiner, put on another cable, and then put the end on the back of that, and make a really long cable. You know, between 16 and 80 means I've got, you know, 1.5 meters of cable, which is well more than enough to go around a person. So I actually did that last night and decided to see how far the body was. This is the best way to see a jumper like this, to know how far you have to go, is to actually try it on. And so I'll see if I can just switch over and show you what it looked like. So that there is last night. That was me trying it on last night. And you can see the bottom edge looks a little wavy. That's actually because it's sort of curling around the cable, because the cable's a little longer. It's longer than I am. But yeah, so I'm getting there. I'm probably about halfway maybe through the body. But yeah, it's a lot easier to check the size using an interchangeable circular like this, because I can just snap on another cable, pull it through, and try it on. I don't have to thread it on, you know, thread hundreds of stitches onto scrap wool and then thread them back onto the needle and worry I'm going to drop one. So I'm using the 3.5, actually. I've gone up to 3.5mm Addi Clicks, and I'm using the 80 centimeters length for the most part here on the body, just because the 60 does bunch it up a little bit. I'm just going around and around and around. I do have other circular interchangeables, and that's something I can show you. I can show you some of the other examples of them, because they're really great. I like them a lot. So the first set I actually bought of circular interchangeables were actually the Denise interchangeables. So this is a kit. Denise made, I don't know if they were one of the first companies to do them, but you can get Denise or Boy, I think also needles, interchangeables like with wire from decades ago. So they were pretty early to this, but this particular set came out a while back, and as you can see, it comes in this cool carrying case, and it's a plastic one, which is why it's not my favorite to use, but I did use it for a lot of jumpers when I started. Oh, hi, Veliswa, nice to see you. Thanks for joining. Not many of us watching today, but I'm very grateful for those of you who say hello. But yeah, so this is the Denise set, and it also uses, you can see it comes with a lot more different cables, like different lengths of cables. This is an example of like the joiner that I told you about. The one for the Addi Clicks is metal, but it's sort of similar and a little bit longer. But you could join cables together. I'll show you there if I pull one out. And these, again, you just push in and click. And then the needles, again, what am I doing? Put another, there we go. And then I can put a needle tip on that. So these are great. I enjoy using them. The plastic is a little, it's a little bit flexible. It's nice on your hands. The cable's quite thick. As you can see, if once you're using that smallest needle size here, the cable is probably the same thickness as the needle, maybe even a little thicker. So for a jumper like I'm doing, which is a very fine wool, I probably wouldn't want to use this one. I have a feeling also that the plastic is a little tacky, like it might catch a little bit on the wool. But these are a great set, and like I said, I use these to knit things, a lot of the things when I was starting out. Great Christmas present if you're looking for something for someone. The Denise needles. And they also come with, one thing that's really cool is they come with some end stoppers here. You see these little things. So you can actually put one of these on the end of your knitting and sort of leave it in stasis for a while. And maybe you've got a project on the go, but you really need that size tips for another project. You can actually just put some stoppers on it to keep it from unraveling, and then swap off and put the new tips on. So stoppers are really useful, and most of the kits come with some stoppers and some joiners. So that's the Denise set. Like I said, one of the classics, and I keep it because you can never have too many needles. The Addy Clicks, as I told you about, the set I bought actually came in this huge carrying case, and I decided I didn't want to bring that all the way to Germany, so I actually this is my preferred circular organization strategy, is a snap block bag, a Ziploc bag. But my Addy Clicks I've dumped into a bag, but you can see all the different size tips there that you can snap on with that spring motion. Another type are the Knit Pro. So I was using wooden needles the last time you saw a wooden circular, and actually I've got that here. So this is, again, I keep all my circulars organized by this method and just write the size on there. But this is the needle I was using last time. So as you can see, this is a fixed circular. The ends, they don't come off, not unless they break, and you don't want that to happen. But so this is a fixed circular, and the Knit Pros, which is a lovely sort of wood, nice wood sort of, they've stained it to have a little rainbow color, which is kind of pretty. But Knit Pro also do interchangeables as well. I don't have a full set. You can get both wooden and metal tips with the Knit Picks, but I do have a couple sets here. And again, so these ones are a different mechanism to go on. They actually screw on. So I've got both some wooden ones. Here's a set of the wooden tips. And they actually, it's actually a tiny threaded screw. And so you just literally screw them on. And you need like a paper clip to stick in that little hole. And then you can use that as leverage to really tighten it up, because often when you're knitting, the movement of your hands might actually tend to unscrew the tip. So you want to tighten it up really tightly. And so the Knit Pro, I think the Knit Picks and Knit Pro, same, are probably a tighter join. Because of that, especially if you use the little tool and you tighten it up really tight. The Addy Clicks, I have sometimes had them pop off while I'm knitting, or the Denise, because it's just a bit of a twist movement, and then once the little catch is broken, they come off, and that's always a terrible, terrifying moment when all your stitches suddenly fall off your needle there. But yeah, so there's the Knit Pro. So again, it's just a screw. But again, great option. If you guy at work asked me for a gift idea for his girlfriend who wanted to get into knitting, and on my recommendation, he got her a set of the Knit Pro interchangeables, which is a really lovely gift that will set a knitter up for just about anything that they want to knit. But that's a different type of interchangeable there. Don't know that there are any other types. Those are the three main ones that I've seen. Back to Lenatus. But as you can see, I'm knitting this big jumper here, and it's all sort of right in front of me. It's not, I don't have long needles sticking out to either side, and I don't have, if I were knitting this flat, I would have this entire part of, at least half the jumper, the front or the back, on a long needle. First of all, I'd need really long needles to squish that many stitches on, and it would be hanging off my wrist. That's not great for your wrists. So with the circular needle, the weight of it is sitting on my lap or on the desk or the table, whatever I'm working on. So much better overall for your ergonomics. And I can knit like this on a plane quite happily, and it's not poking the person to either side. The movement I'm making is actually quite small. But it doesn't look like the caricature of a grandma knitting. Oh, question here. Veliswa says, so you want to avoid them unscrewing because your knitting can unravel. Yes, basically, imagine here, Veliswa, and I'll pull a loop out so we can see it. But imagine on my left needle here, I'm knitting along, and all of a sudden, it pops off like that. These stitches here live could easily, if I'm not paying attention, just end up sliding off. And as soon as they come off a needle, they're going to start unraveling all down the jumper. And so I'd have to scream and go and try and find a darning needle or something to try and catch them and try and get them, fix them and get them back on the needle. And it's all very stressful, and you don't want that to happen. So you want to make sure you got something that's got a good strong join. And so, like I said, these have a click mechanism, but because it's a twist and a push, occasionally you can do that by accident. So you just want to be careful. So yeah, you don't want the tips unscrewing from the cables and dropping all of your lovely work. So on the last episode, I had to join in a new ball of wool. And we talked about different ways of doing that. And I ended up doing a spit splice, except Donna, no, I did not actually spit on it. I used some water. But I did that, and I told you about how ideally I would have done that at a side seam, but to demonstrate for you, I did it in the middle of the garment. And upon reflection later that night when I was knitting on it, I decided I didn't like that. I felt like where the join was, even though I felted it together pretty well, it was still a little thicker than the surrounding wool, and being right in the middle on the front, I could see it, and I decided that was just going to drive me nuts if I were to wear it. So I ended up frogging, or actually no, I didn't frog because that's when you rip it. I tinked. Remember, tinking is knitting backwards. So I tinked backwards to the side seam, and I actually did my join there. And let me see if I can find it. How much progress have I made in the last week? Would have been, there it is. Yeah, so there it is there. So there's the two ends. So I actually did a very small section of about 5 or 6 stitches where I knitted with both wools together, and you can tell, you can't spot it at all. And it'll be even better once I give this a nice wash and a press. But I've got the loose ends here, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tie them together in a little bow, just so that they stay out of my way on the inside of the garment. So that's how much progress I've made since last week. What, like 2-3 inches? Slow going this. Yeah, but after all of my talk about how you wouldn't even notice being on the front and everything, I decided it was unacceptable. And I frogged it back and or tinked it back and did it properly so that I would be happy with it. And I think that's, yeah, like I said, that's something a lot of beginners struggle with. They want it to be perfect, but they also don't want to stop. They feel like they need to get to the end of the project as fast as possible, and so they'll make a mistake or they'll do something they don't like, and rather than stop and figure out how to fix it, they just power on and end up with something that they don't love, and that's not exactly inspiring for your next project. So my advice is, fix it. When something bad happens, figure out how to fix it and make it so that you'll like it. And if you had fun knitting it and you have to undo it and redo that bit again, it will be just as fun the second time. So I'm quite happy about that. Oh, I'm warm in here today. I'm wearing a different jumper. I should mention my jumper. I'll show you a picture of it. I actually have a picture of it here. The jumper that I'm wearing is one I knitted many years ago, and it's called St. Bridget by Alice Starmore. So that's what it looks like there. That's the Ravelry page for it. And as you can see, St. Bridget is a traditional Aran style, heavily cabled jumper. And my version, I did it exactly like that. I didn't do that fringe at the bottom because, fringe. But if I pull it forward here, you can see a bit of it. So yeah, it has these very beautiful Celtic style cables along with some more traditional rope style cables. It had a lot of charts. It was a very complicated knit. It's knitted flat and then you sew it together. Oh, hang on, I got to switch back to the camera so you can actually see what I'm doing here. I'm showing you the cables. So this is the cables. So it's the Celtic style cables. There's the traditional sort of more of a plait. Yeah, under the arms, it's got some moss stitch and seed stitch there. So yeah, lots of cables, very complicated. It is sewn together. So that is an example of the side seam there, where I've sewn it. Sewn that you knit the front, the back, each of the arms all separately. Yeah, it's a very complicated pattern. I knitted that several years ago and put it in the Sydney Royal Easter Show. It's knitted out of 10-ply Aran wool, which is a lot, or worsted weight in America, you might call it. It is a lot thicker than what I'm knitting with right now. So yes, complicated pattern, but also because it's a thicker wool, it does knit up faster. I don't know, probably still took me the same amount of time as this, given how complicated it was and that you have to sew it together. But it's very warm, so I'm quite warm today. I knitted it out of Joe Sharp Silk Road Aran Tweed, which is an Australian wool. And it's mainly wool, but it has some silk in it, as you might guess. And it's tweedy, so it's got these sort of little, show you on the sleeve, little slubs in it. By a tweed, that's what I mean. It's the little flecky bits. And honestly, probably not the best style of wool for this style of jumper. Because of the fleck, you lose a little bit of the detail, versus in a very smooth plain wool, you would really see the texture like you do on that, look at that green one there. Like the design really pops out at you. And because I've done it in such a flecky, rustic wool, it doesn't quite pop quite as much, but I actually fell in love with the wool, and it's really comfortable to wear. Great as an outer layer on a wintry day. So I often will perhaps choose wools that are maybe not ideal for the project, but that I want to wear. I think that's fine. Oh, thanks, Phyllis. She says she wishes she could make stuff with her hands. This is great. I didn't grow up knowing how to do this. I learned this as an adult. This is a skill I learned as an adult. There are plenty of great learn to knit tutorials on YouTube. Is my volume really loud? Let me see if I can pare it back a little bit. Oh yeah, I kept going in the red zone and wondered why I had it really loud. Sorry. Yeah, there's plenty of great learn to knit tutorials on YouTube. Have a look at those. There are also classes you can do. I mean, if it were the normal times, your knitting shop, local knitting shop might have classes that you can do. And I did a couple classes with knitting shops back in Sydney when I started out. Mainly just to make sure that the way I had learned from books and from the internet was right. It's sometimes easy to start doing something and not realize you're maybe doing it slightly differently than the way everybody else does. And that's cool, but it can mess you up later down the track. So it's always great just to make sure you haven't picked up any bad habits. For example, sometimes I would have someone come into the knitting shop, and the normal way you make a knitting stitch is you put the tip of the needle into the next stitch, sort of stabbing away from you. So to the left side of the stitch and stabbing away. And there's another way to twist a stitch, to do a twisted knit stitch. You actually put your stitch in through the back of the loop, and you can knit like this. And what that does is it twists that stitch as you knit it. And you do this many times in patterns for effect, as part of a particular look. But this person had not known that, and they did that for every stitch, thinking that was knitting. And they were unhappy with how it made their knitting look, because their knitting didn't look like the pictures. And so that's where just going in and having someone just give you a little bit of advice can save you a world of heartache. And look, I actually told this person that they didn't necessarily have to stop what they were doing. It's just that when they came around to that stitch again the next time, they just needed to treat it differently to undo the twist. Or if they were doing stocking stitch, when they came back on the purl side, they can untwist it. So there are ways to compensate for that, and I don't want you to think that there's no one true way to do anything in knitting. But if you want consistent results on a particular pattern, you kind of need to make sure you're doing it the way that the designer intended. And so a class can be good at that. Also, reading patterns. Reading patterns is probably the hardest part for new knitters. It was something a lot of people would have questions about. And Of course, it's completely understandable. Like I've talked about this, that I've given several talks at tech conferences about how knitting patterns are a form of programming language. They're an algorithm. And when you look at a knitting pattern, it reads like a computer program that I am executing. Right now, I am just doing an endless while loop. While jumper is not as long as my body, keep knitting. But they get a lot more complicated with that. And as I said, with multiple charts and different ways different designers abbreviate things, different forms of increases and decreases, they can seem quite cryptic. And so a class can really help with that as well. Hard right now because, as I said, the knitting shops aren't, most of the world, they're not probably doing classes if they're smart. But there are online classes you can do. As I said, Ravelry has a lot of advice. If you sign up for Ravelry, you can get advice on things. You might also look into whether your area has a knitting guild. These do exist. It's not just a medieval thing, guilds. I was a member of the New South Wales, I am a member of the New South Wales Knitters Guild back in Australia. And they would meet once a month and they would put on classes, all kinds of stuff. And you get sort of camaraderie, get inspiration, sharing with other people. Yes, there were men in our guild. Not many. We would love there to be more, but there were a few men. But the guild can be quite a great way. There's also informal knitting groups. You may hear them called Stitch and Bitch. So our S&B or sit and stitch if you are my mom and you don't want to say the B word. There are various knitting groups like that back in Sydney. Shout out to the Thursday Night Knitters back in Sydney who always meet up at 99 on York, the bowling club. Or I don't know if they are now, if they're back to doing it. Australia's doing much better with Corona than the rest of us. But that was a fun group, and newcomers were always welcome to come join us and get help with their knitting. Plenty of opportunities to learn if you really want to. All right, I'm telling you, I'm getting so bored with this. So I did grab another WIP, W-I-P, work in progress. Every knitter has multiple WIPs going on at any given time. I did grab another one just to show you something else because now for 3 weeks you've been staring at this endlessly. So the other project I grabbed, and let me just, where is it? There it is. There's a little project bag here. This is something, I've had this on the go for literally years. It's, yeah. Oh, Jody's on. Yeah, so it's the Bolo knitting. Yeah, the Thursday night knitting group, they're not back at the bowling group yet. They're doing it via Zoom. That's right. But yeah, your area might have a knitting group. So this is a scarf, just a little scarf I started a long time ago. It's called a memory scarf. And I'll show you why, and this is going to look probably really kind of weird to you. I'm just knitting mainly stocking stitch with occasionally I throw in a couple stripes of garter stitch you can see there. But what makes this interesting is what I'm knitting with. And as you can see, I don't know if you can tell that there are two strands. So there's a white strand, which is like I think like a nylon or a cotton thread. Actually, is it silk? It might be silk. And the gray one, actually the gray one is wire. It is very, very thin wire covered in silk. And so I'm holding these two together and knitting with them. And the reason it's called a memory scarf is because of that thin amount of wire, it wants to hold its shape. So if I give it a stretch, it actually wants to hold its shape. And so you can kind of, scrunch it up as you're wearing it. And it doesn't feel like it, it's not soft as like wool, but it feels like a textile because of knitting with that thread with it as well. But it's a bit more of a fashion item. It's not going to be keeping you warm, of course. And as you can see here, I'm knitting it with circular needles, even though I'm going back and forth. I'm not actually knitting it in the round. See if I can just find where the working wool's kind of tangled up a little bit here. Right. And so this is an interesting one because as you can see here on the side, I had to join in. it gets tangled up occasionally. The wire gets itself into a knot. And guess what? You cannot undo a knot in very, very, very fine silk wrapped wire. So I had to break it and join in again. And this stuff's not going to felt. You cannot felt wire and nylon or whatever it is together. So I've just had to tie a knot. So I've tied a bow at the side for now. And when I finish, I will go back and run the ends up and down. But some fabrics that you just can't felt together, you're going to have to make a knot. Like, otherwise this would unravel. But I thought I haven't worked on this in ages, but I thought because of the wire, it would be a fun thing to show you all. And the cone I got with the two threads together, this is from Teresa Dare. So Teresa Dare is a Melbourne knitting artist doing quite sort of, I would say, very modern knitting pieces. She's not knitting a jumper like this Sit Bridget at all. She does, knitted jewelry, and she's using interesting materials like this. Actually, I think it's Japanese. That's where she gets it from, sources it from, this wire. But I saw her, she's got glow-in-the-dark yarn to knit with. She's got various tapes that you can knit with. And so if you're interested, you think you want to knit, but you don't want to knit a very traditional style woolen jumper or woolen scarf, look up Teresa Dare. That's Dair. I can't remember. I think I read that she was closing up her shop, but she may still be doing it online. I hope she is, because her stuff's really cool. I actually had her come and teach a class at the Knitters Guild camp many years ago, which is where I got this. I actually bought a few kits from her. I bought this to do the memory scarf, and I also bought a kit. She sold a kit of like 8 different cones of different colors in 100% silk to knit a Doctor Who scarf. And I actually did that. It's called the Tsumugi Who, because Tsumugi is the name of the silk yarn. And I have a Doctor Who scarf. It's very long. It's not quite full Tom Baker length, but it's pretty damn long. And you can see I'm going a lot slower on this. Part of the reason is because it's the two, each stitch is actually 2 threads. If I screw up and split it and let's say only knit the one, then the other one, it could unravel. It could, it probably won't given this, but it could, it'll be sticking out and it won't be a proper stitch. So I'm going a little slower. I'm using these are, I think these are Addi Turbos, but you see they're quite blunt. And again, that helps make sure I'm not splitting. I'm getting both together, and they're quite slippery too, which is good because you don't want to catch on this stuff. And so yeah, I'm doing knitting here. I can't remember. I'm on the wrong side, so that's going to make this a garter stitch row. And yes, this is a project. I'm just knitting until I run out of the stuff, and it's mainly a novelty thing. I think the wire is an interesting conversation starter. Every time I tell people about it, though, they instantly start thinking that I can put power through it, like an e-textile. You can put you can create e-textiles with knitting, but not by knitting the wire itself in, because obviously it crosses over itself a bunch of times. You're going to short it out the second you turn it on. So no, I will. This is not something that I can actually electrify in any way without killing the wearer. But the way you actually turn a knitted garment into an e-textile is you can get conductive thread, which is very thin wire, similar to this. But you actually knit the garment first out of wool or whatever you're knitting it out of, and then you sew in the conductive thread for the circuits. But you do it so that they don't touch each other and they don't cross, because you'll get a short. And I've done some things like that, and yeah, you have to be very careful. What did I do? Oh, it looks like did I drop a stitch there? Oh no, it's just the stitch is very large, stretched out for some reason. I'm not too picky on this thing because the pattern doesn't really matter. It's mainly all about that wire. But yeah, you can do e-textiles, weave in conductive thread to add buttons and lights and things to your knitting. You do have to be very careful not to let the conductive thread touch itself, touch each other. You will get a short. So when I have done projects like that in the past, you often end up using clear nail polish on the back side to cover up any areas where you could trigger a short. You can't just knit, as of yet, an e-textile, as far as I know. I don't know, maybe some scientist is working on it, but... So yeah, this is the Teresa Dare memory scarf. And it will not be for warmth, it will mainly be for fashion. But wow, this stuff wants to, it's interesting. It's coming off the cone, and it, I think because the thread, the white thread, because it's just a thread, has stretched and the wire has not, it means as it comes off, you know, it wants to sort of get tangled up a little bit. There's more white thread coming off than wire, and so I got to just stop every now and then and kind of untangle it. This is one of the annoyances with using a circular for knitting back and forth, is if you've got a really long cable, it wants to sort of get up in your way. So I'm kind of trying to tuck it out of the way. But that might be an argument for when you would want to use a shorter cable, or hell, you could use straight needles if you really, really insist on them. I should have changed the project details for when I'm working on this so that you know it's not Lenatus. But Lenatus is my main project on the go right now. I had a great knitting sesh with a couple friends via video conference on Friday, which really cheered me up, with Jody, with Amy, with Donna. Always good. Miss getting together with the knitting group. I have found some good knitting shops in Munich. I mean, the wool that I'm knitting Lenatus from is actually from a Munich knitting shop called Artelia, which is just a little cave of wonders. They're just stacked full of really nice wool. There's also one I've been to not too far away called the Mercerie, de Mercerie, very French, which is a gorgeous little shop with some nice wool in it. Of course, none of them are doing classes right now, so... All right, well, if I'm doing stocking stitch, maybe I'll purl a row, because you know what? You've not yet seen me purl in 3 weeks because I'm doing this endless stocking stitch in the round. So let's do a purl row, all right? So you've been watching me knitting, which is, you know, knitting is, and if I get the last stitch in this particular wool always stretches out quite a bit. So normally for knitting, I'm going away from myself like that. For purl, instead, I'm going to go towards myself. The needle's coming through and going towards me, like this. I'm going to take the working wool around the top and around, and then back the stitch out. And you see, I kind of use my thumb to kind of push it through. So again, here I'll do another one away from the edge, you can see. So it's coming on the right-hand side of the stitch from the back towards me. My working wool goes over the top and around. Get my fingers out of the way, you can see it, around to the left. And then I use the tip of my thumb to kind of push that tip back out and catch the loop. So people get very like, ooh, purl. It's very, very easy movement. It's just the reverse of knitting. The trick is, it's much easier, I think, to purl if you're a thrower like I am, as you can see. To do it as a picker, where you hold the knitting wool in your left hand, continental style, is harder. And there are different, oops, oh no, I didn't split it. Okay, I thought I did. There are different ways you can do it. One I've seen, which is a sort of South American style. It's a technique, a tradition they do in South America. I had taught to me by a knitter named Liz Gemmell back in Australia, knitting teacher. Is you actually take the working wool. Let me pull a big loop loose here, and you actually loop it over your neck. So if you look on the little camera, I've actually just looped it around my neck here, and so that's what's keeping this wool under tension. So I'm not actually holding it with my hands at all. And so now if I put the needle through to purl, actually I'm just going to twang this over the needle with my left thumb and make the stitch. And so this is one way of doing continental style purling. So I'm actually using the wool coming around my neck to put tension on it. And this is just a very small little movement. As you can see, needle comes through, I twang it over. And I've actually, I think on my YouTube page, have a demonstration of how to do this, specifically with doing two color knitting, because that is quite tricky as well. I have done, normally when you do Fair Isle, like I'm doing, which is the two colored patterned, two yarns in the same row, you do it in the round so that you only ever have to knit. But if you find yourself having to purl, you will have to do something like this. So that's the sort of South American tradition of doing it around your neck. I think there's another way of holding it in your left hand, but look, I'm not good at it, so I do the around the neck way on the few occasions I have to purl continental style, which I only do if I'm doing two colors. So when you do one row with knit and then the subsequent row with purl in flat knitting, not as a tube, which is what we're doing, that's stockinette stitch. And so as I get to the end of the row here and turn around, don't know if we might have to do a few rows for you to see it. Stocking stitch, we also call it stockinette. Okay, I always give my knitting a bit of a tug when I get to the end. So you can see there it is a bumpy row, which is that row of all knits that I did. And then above that, just below the needle, you can see a sort of, it's receding again. So this is a good example of stocking stitch, this section here. So on the front, you get sort of almost like chain loops, like chain mail. This would be a great way to make knitted chain mail, actually. And then on the back, it's bumpy. It's not smooth the way it is on the front. So that's stocking stitch for you. Knitting on one side, purl on the other, unless you're going around and around in a tube like I am with Lenatus, in which case you create stocking stitch by just knitting because you're always looking at the outside of the garment. It makes no sense. Oh, look, I did a row where I did eyelets, where I deliberately made bigger stitches just for fun, because this is just a bit of a random scarf, and so I'm just doing random things as they come to me. And so, yeah, I think for that one I did a yarn over and then a knit two together the whole way around. So basically I increased some stitches and decreased some stitches, but this is a little bit of a sampler. I just thought I would show it to you because, yeah, the wire aspect, the memory scarf aspect is kind of fun. And it's a little bit scratchy. It's not as soft as a merino, I'll tell you that. But that's something that I, whenever I don't have a project on the go, or I need something that doesn't require my brain, I can just, and it's very, very small little package, I can just chuck that in a little project bag and carry that in my handbag and do it. I'm going to put that away now. You will accumulate, as a knitter, a lot of little bags to put your projects in and keep them organized. It's a little project bag. Back to Lenatus. So Lenatus, we're doing stocking stitch. So there's the outside, there's the inside, but because it's in the round, all I have to do is knit. So no purling required. The other thing I meant to draw your attention to in the memory scarf is you'll notice the stitches had holes in them, you know, it was a lot looser. And that's because I was using quite a big needle for knitting with that very, very fine wire and thread, I was actually using a very big needle, and that's what created that sort of airy, chainmail-y, see-through effect. That's what happens when you knit, because basically the size of the needle is the size of the hole in the middle of the stitch, and you can do that for effect. You can knit a bigger needle with a given wool, and that will create a looser fabric. As I said, I've gone up a needle size here at the bottom of the jumper, which is going to make the waist area flare out a bit. It's going to make it a little looser around the hips. So you sometimes do that for effect. I've also, there's very big, almost like broom handles. I've seen people knitting like mohair scarves on something like that. Mohair is that very, very, very fuzzy, wispy sort of wool. And so when you knit mohair, you can knit mohair on very big needles, and because of the fuzziness of it, it will sort of hold its shape, almost a little bit like that memory wool. And yeah, so you can knit it on very, very big needles, and it will be very stretchy and very delicate. And then, of course, you can go the opposite way. You can knit something on smaller needles to make it tighter and denser and closer together. And for example, you look at this jumper, this one I'm wearing, the St. Bridget. It's knitted quite firmly, like you cannot see through that fabric or very little. Because, it's deliberately knitted densely like that. B, also I'm a tight knitter. And so I tend to knit my things a little bit tighter and denser anyway. So often when I'm knitting a project, I will use a larger needle size than the pattern calls for, because I know that with my tension, and we talked about this, every pattern at the start of the pattern will have a gauge swatch. Let me switch back to St. Bridget there and see on Ravelry. You can see here gauge right there in the middle of the screen. 22 stitches and 32 rows equals 10 centimeters in chart A. So what you would do, theoretically what you do if you were going to knit that jumper is you'd make sure that the wool you had was equivalent thickness to the ones suggested. So you don't have to use the exact wool. This is Alice Starmore Hebridean 3-ply Scottish header. Yarn weight, DK 8-ply. So any DK or 8-ply, 11 wraps per inch, that is basically you take a ruler and you wrap the yarn around it, and that's how many wraps you get in 1 inch on the ruler. So as long as you have a yarn that is similar thickness, you're going to use a needle size 4 millimeter, and you're going to start by knitting a swatch, we call it. And this normally you knit stockinette stitch, but this is telling you specifically over chart A, which is one of the charts for these cables. So you knit that for it says you want to knit a 10 centimeter square, but what I would do is actually knit 22 stitches and 32 rows and then measure it. You actually probably want to knit slightly bigger, there's different ways of doing it. You can knit what she says, knit 22 stitches and 32 rows, cast it off, wash it, dry it, and measure it to see if it's 10 centimeters. Or you're going to knit chart A, and what I would probably do is take chart A and bump it up to about, 30 or 40 stitches and knit maybe 40, 45 rows, cast it off, do the washing and drying and measuring. Because around the edges of knitting, your tension is always slightly different than it is in the middle of the knitting. So by putting a bit of a border around it, you eliminate that problem. But yeah, so you're supposed to knit a gauge swatch. And then let's say I knitted that, and instead of being 10 centimeters, mine was 9 centimeters. You might think, okay, cool, what's the big problem? Well, that's a 10% difference, which over the course of your jumper means that the size you're knitting could very well not come out correct. And so to get a bigger swatch, I would then need to use a bigger needle. And so I would knit that again using a bigger needle. If I knitted that and my swatch came out as 12 centimeters instead of 10, that means that my jumper, I might be knitting a small size. It might come out quite large. It might come out 20% larger. And so again, I would knit theoretically what you're supposed to do is use another swatch and knit it with a smaller needle and see if you get closer. So we call this getting gauge. And so this is how you check your tension before you knit a pattern. Truth be told, like I said, it's what you're supposed to do. Is it what we always do? No, it is not. I did not knit a gauge swatch on this jumper, and if you heard me in the first stream, you would have seen that it ended up causing me a problem and ended up pulling it apart. I sort of know based on past experience that my tension is just slightly tighter across the board. So I just basically start with whatever's recommended for the pattern and then go up a needle size. That tends to be my normal way. But you'll recall I had knitted, the first, say 3 or 4. I was probably on the 4th motif of the collar, and I wasn't really happy with the fabric. It felt a little loose. It was a little see-through, and I realized I'd messed up the pattern anyway. And so when I frogged it, I took the opportunity to go down a needle size because I could tell it was going to come out a little large and it was a little looser. I didn't like the quality of the fabric. And so I frogged it and started over with a smaller needle, and I'm much happier with it. And as you would have seen from the size check as of yesterday, the fit is really good. So I'm quite happy with that. But this is what you have to do as a knitter. You have to be prepared to change needle size. You cannot just blindly do what the pattern says and expect to get the right result if you're making something that has a specific size. If you're knitting a scarf, go for your life. It doesn't matter. It probably doesn't matter unless you're aiming for a very specific effect. So yeah, but for anything you need to fit, you want to pay close attention to the tension. And that's not to say that that's I said that changing the needle size is one response you can have to get it to fit, but that's actually not the only option. Let's say that your swatch that you knit, instead of 10 centimeters, comes out 12 centimeters. So rather than switching to a small needle, perhaps you actually really like the quality of the fabric you're getting on that particular needle size. The other option is to just literally knit the next size down. So there's some complicated math you can do, but if you know, hey, my swatch is 20% bigger, well, let me just pick a size that corresponds then to the gauge I am knitting at. You can work it out, and maybe you just end up knitting a bigger or smaller size to compensate for your gauge, and knowing that then you don't have to actually change to use the one. You don't have to use the one that the pattern says. You can choose not to. Or maybe if the pattern doesn't have other sizes, there's other tricks you can do. I mean, the number of rows is always a funny one because, who cares? If you're knitting in the round like I am, I'm not counting the number of rows I'm knitting. I'm just trying the thing on as I go, and I'm knitting it until it fits me. So that's really good. With something like this jumper, the St. Bridget jumper, you'll notice the cable repeat is really long. So I wouldn't want to stop in the middle of one of these cables. You kind of want to do complete repeats. So the number of rows does matter a bit more on that because, you're depending on your row gauge, how many rows you knit per centimeter, you could end up with a slightly longer or shorter jumper. If it was a little too short, I would have to knit a whole other repeat to lengthen it. But most of that's why I like knitting in the round, especially knitting in the round from top down, because you can really make it completely custom to fit. But yeah, row gauge, knit as many rows as you want. Knit the scarf till it's as long as you want. Knit with that memory scarf, I'm just knitting until I run out of the yarn. But with stitch gauge, so with the number of knitted stitches in a row, let's say you've only got a single-sized pattern, but you really want to knit it. One option would be to add in some extra stitches. Let's say yours is going to be 10% too small around the body. You could always add in some extra stitches under the arm on either side, just to make it a bit wider. And this jumper, the St. Bridget, actually it's got that section under the arm, which is just moss stitch. You can see it's just a repeating pattern. And a lot of these cable jumpers have that because for the different sizes, all they do is increase the width of that section. You know, because of the cables on the front, you can't really easily add in more cables. What you do is you end up with that sort of garbage section under the arms where they add more stitches in. So that's an option as well. You can always adjust a jumper pattern or a hat or whatever, add in some more stitches to make it bigger. Taking them out is harder. It's easier to add stitches in than take them out. All right, we are nearly at 1 hour. Still someone online watching me. Thanks for hanging around to the end there. This is really fun. Last week I didn't end up doing my evening stream, but I will, you know, it's best effort. Sunday night, sometimes I'm just not feeling it. See if I'm up for it tonight. So I may be doing another knitting stream at, was I going to do it? I was going to do it at 9 o'clock. So in about 10 hours from now. So if you subscribe to my Twitch stream, you will get a notification if and when I start. I'm also, by the way, I'm archiving these to YouTube. Twitch hangs on to the streams for 2 weeks, but I'm actually archiving them over to YouTube. So they'll stay on YouTube. So if you just found it and you want to go back and watch watch me doing the same stocking stitch on Lenatus, 3 weeks ago, you can actually go over to YouTube and watch earlier streams there. So thank you for joining me. I don't think I'm going to have this done by the end of the year. Getting right down to the end of the year. But maybe I'll get the body done. I have a feeling the sleeves are going to be endless slog as well. So I hope you're having a lovely Sunday, and I will see you again either in 9 hours, hopefully, or in a week. So have a great week, everybody. Bye.